governor, and Bob Cassett, of all people, was being elected United States Senator. So I thought I'd made up too many Republicans, and I really felt guilty about that.
That's right.
That's right.
Catherine, do you edit your stories too after you go out and file a report?
Usually, of course, I go out and write I produce the story with the photographer. I'm there wherever the shooting is being done, and I'll write the script and basically put the whole thing together. And usually, the script is pretty much left alone.
Do you always know what you're going to say, though?
No. Don't I? You mean when I'm headed on...
When you stand in front of that camera, do you...
Oh, for live shots, you don't always have much time. That sort of thing you don't.
And
but I enjoy that, because that's a bit more of a challenge.
Right.
And there are times when you literally are pushed in front of the camera right after something has happened, but I think that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It may not sound as though it would be, but the fact that something could go wrong, maybe that intrigues me, I don't know. But I enjoy live reporting.
But you have a good presence on camera, too. And the brain is thinking, right, ahead of your speech.
And then, maybe it's, for example, a trial or a political campaign, or say I'm doing some live reporting. It may seem impromptu, but, on the other hand, it's something I've probably been covering for a month. Mm-hmm. And so I ought to know by then whether it's live or unscripted or not what I'm talking about. I should.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But when you do deliver the news in the studio, for example, is there a teleprompter there that you're reading off of?
If you see me sitting on the set with John McCullough, on a set piece, we call it, that it usually comes off a little better, I think, if it's not totally scripted. I've come in and I've got an outline and I've taken notes and I know basically what John will ask. But it's really better to be a little free and easy.
Mm-hmm.
But of course the anchor people have got scripts and teleprompters, and you can't play around too much because you're timing into sound bites and tape and...
Right.
So...
Have you ever been sent out to cover a story and disliked the coverage? Let's say a drug trial.
The story, maybe.
Well, yes, or the people involved. Maybe you really don't like those people, but you've got to be objective, right?
Sure. And there are often places I'm sent where I'm not welcome, and people are fed up with just seeing reporters, and I'm certainly no exception. I think the Dallas stories aren't too crazy about me, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you can get used to that, So it's something that you just accept.
Have you ever been thrown out of a room or...
Well, I'm trying to think if I've ever actually been thrown out of something. People have tried. This is probably...
I've thrown out a few bars.
I've often wondered if maybe it just would never happen, but wouldn't it be wonderful if at a party or something you ran into the mayor or the chief after something particularly biting?
I've done that.
Have you? What's happened?
Is it awkward?
Not for me. It may be for them. I was physically thrown out of the mayor's office once by his personal bodyguard, who was a police captain.
Did you threaten him?
Well, I think it was probably my fault. I was trying to cover a public meeting, and he didn't want me to cover it. And after he told me a number of times, I had to leave because he wanted to have a private meeting with this budget committee he was meeting with.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him I wouldn't do it until he followed the state law, anti-secrecy law. And after he had told me enough times, and at a louder and louder pitch each time, he had his personal bodyguard pick me up out of the chair in his office that I had sat down in and throw me out. He did it very well, too.
Mm-hmm.
Like a pro.
What other places have you been found?
That was one of the...
You didn't threaten to sue the mayor, huh?
That was one of the classier places I've been thrown out.
One of the classier.
Actually, we did sue the mayor. There was a lawsuit filed that afternoon, and ultimately it went to trial. And the judge determined that the mayor and the public officials who had attended that meeting had violated the law. Issued an injunction which essentially says don't do it again.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the public meeting was over at that point, but if you hadn't challenged it, it would have just continued as a practice. So you had to...
Sounds like a soap opera, folks. We have to pause here for a public service announcement. We'll be back in a minute. Jim Henderson was just visiting my guest, news reporter Catherine Heenan and columnist Joel McNally. Do you think, Catherine, that the station, WTNJ, or all the stations here, relate to the people in Milwaukee? Do you feel that you're really getting to people and reflecting what's happening?
It's a good question. It's a great question. I don't know.
Modestly.
We have no answer. Just great question. I don't know. Well, maybe what I said before touches on that. And probably, I think we're making an effort not to. But in general, maybe TV tends to dwell on meetings and things and talking heads and interviews a bit much. And I don't know. I'm not sure what you can do about that, because a lot of those things do affect people and are significant enough that you have to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Jim. I can't pretend to say that.
I think in the case of Channel 4, just the longevity of John McCullough, he sits there year after year like a Maytag or something. and that sort of suggests a long continuing relationship between them.
There's credibility there.
I like that a little better than the approach of some other stations where they throw in all this hokey, we're pulling for you, Milwaukee. I don't want my reporters to pull for me and to cheerlead for me, and I want them to tell me what's going on.
What's going on in the community, right. Do you think the Journal, the newspaper, reflects life here in the city?
To a great extent. We obviously are limited by our own perceptions and values, and we always talk about the whole problem of a lot of reporters and editors, representing a certain sort of middle class, upper middle class, maybe east side, suburban kind of elite, and not really relating to the common folk. Well, but also then they sometimes try to overcompensate for that by doing what they think is relating to the common folk, just to go cover boulders or something.
Patronizing.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to ask if there are many working class kids who become editors of the Journal or in the media. I know, I lived in New York for a while. We certainly aren't at the New York Times or Newsweek or the Post.
Well, I can think of some editors who I consider pretty common.
Not so classy. They reflect the community.
If they did, they probably don't as much anymore. And that's a problem. I think we're aware of it too. I think we try to take that into account and think about that.
But you don't have a blue-collar columnist, for example.
No, not really.
Somebody from the factory who contributes.
There's some papers around the country that started doing that, and I thought in a sense that was a little patronizing too. Here we're going to have some working class jerk write for you guys, and this will show that we care about you. And there were perhaps a few writers who were kind of discovered, kind of rough gems like that when that was going on. That was yeah, exactly. But that's about it. Generally, I think you're better off, not sending, gays to cover gays and blacks to cover blacks and working class people to cover working class people, but to send good writers and good reporters that can relate to some of these groups. And I think that makes more sense.
You agree with that, Kathy?
I agree. I'm just sitting here thinking, how much can we really do? And it's not even 30 minutes of news at a block. The commercials and sports and weather.
Right.
So little time.
There is.
And that's always a frustration to me, particularly if I do latch onto something of some depth and interest. And you really have to abbreviate and still just highlight.
Give us headlines or highlights.
Wish we had more of the... Sorry for interrupting. It would be nice to have some kind of a format, even, I don't know, some kind of half-hour program where you can do just a couple of things and do them well. But,
do you get feedback when you go out into the community? Do people come up and say, I like that story, or I think you were wrong, or do you ever get that? Like Joel does?
Yes. I know our anchor people, for example, who are more high-profile and are seen every night, get more of that. But the reporters do, and I've been here long enough, I guess, that people will approach me, which I don't mind, and it makes me very pleased if they don't simply say, oh, I see you, or I think you're a nice looking, but if they say, I like your writing, or I like the story you did, that's nice. I welcome that. I really do.
Joel, do people know who you are?
Yeah, I get a lot of that. A lot of people just on the street and people that I meet. And
is that why you wear those funny disguises when you go out?
that nose with the mustache and all that. Most people who come up to me are in fact supportive. You know, they want to tell me. They say, no one has ever told you this before, ever. You know, but I like what you do. And I think they assume that there's a lot of hostility that I run into. They assume that Milwaukee is a hostile climate for what I'm doing. And I really haven't found it to be all that hostile. You know, in fact, there are a couple of those kinds of assumptions that didn't pan out when they did some readership surveys of my column. They always knew that it was popular among college age and young adult people. But when you looked at some of the demographics, I found out it was also very popular among older people, among senior citizens. You know, I'm like the spokesman for all the old cranks out there. You know, and also I think because I'm the only person doing that sort of thing, a lot of people relate to that. You know, a lot of people just relate to standing up against big forces, big institutions, whether it's government or education or whatever, and they may not even necessarily agree with everything I say or my point of view, but they like the idea that somebody's taking on these big guys.
But some people don't know that you are deliberately being humorous or funny or ludicrous.
Some people who don't know, but I've always maintained that more people understand it than don't. Most of the people who don't like the column don't like it not because they're not understanding what I'm saying, but because they are understanding what I'm saying, and they just happen to hate every word of it. So I haven't run into really all that much from people who just really missed the point, just really didn't understand it.
Has the column ever been rejected or cut in such a way that...
No, it really hasn't. I have to say that for the Journal. They've been very supportive from the beginning. They knew it was going to be controversial from the beginning. They wanted it to be provocative. And no, I've never written a column that they refused to run. I've never even written a column that they've edited very much at all. Generally, it runs exactly as I write it. I'm a clean, like we're talking about writing short, clean sentences.
You're very clean, yes.
I'm clean. And so it's, they've been very supportive that way. And I appreciate it. So there are forces who would prefer not to see a column. It always surprises me when people write in and say, by God, you're un-American, and I'm going to cancel my subscription to the Journal because your column's in there. And I don't think that's a very American attitude, to cut off your source of news because you disagree with somebody else's point of view.
But you also get phone calls sometimes, too, complaining, don't you?
I get some, yeah.
And you talk to these people.
I talk to folks, yeah. They're surprised that they're amazed that I will talk to them. They somehow get the idea from reading the column. I'm a negative person. Now, I don't know where they got that idea, but they expect me to be very strident and angry, and when I talk to them, folksy from Indiana, they're surprised. Do you
have any plans to bring out a book of your column?
I would like to see it. Every once in a while, someone writes me and wants to know if that would be possible, and I would.
Going back over 5.5 or 6 years, you've got a lot of columns.
I think so.
I mean, Russell Baker can do it. Why can't you?
I would imagine it would happen sometime. I just haven't gotten my act together yet.
All right. Catherine, do you always see your work?
No, although it's probably a good idea to do that just to see if it turned out and if I like what I'm doing. Maybe that's not a good sign, but no, very often the last thing I want to do is tune myself in when I get home. I'd rather go see an old Hitchcock film or something. So, nah. So you should keep in touch and do that. I know I should, but I don't always.
Do you consider yourself a role model here for women?
Oh, I don't know. I'm pleased that more...
Well, there aren't too many women in television news.
No, and I suppose that I am pleased that there are more women, obviously. I still think there are some discrepancies in pay, and I still think that the young males seem to more often get the gem assignments, with a couple of exceptions. So I don't pretend everything's rosy in that respect.
Are you a feminist?
Well, raised in a strict Irish Catholic family, very polite, but yes, a bit. There's a kind of an odd mixture of being polite and gentle and yet siding with some of that. But when you say feminist, somehow you picture very strident people with
addressing a rally and wanting some waving up there. But there aren't too many women in management in...
Exactly, another good point. No, not really.
Or anywhere else.
Or anywhere else.
Well, that's true. Do you think there will be
I
For
suppose
example, in 10 or 15 years, can you see that happening here?
should be, and progress, I guess, is being made, but I always balk a little bit at people who give speeches about the great inroads being made, and I can see, even, well, I'll say it, even in my own newsroom, I can see things that are still indicative of the fact that has not been totally cured. Male supremacy.
I find it ironic in America that millionaires deliver the news. I'm talking about the network people.
Not the reporters, Jim.
No, not the reporters, but it's hard to believe Barbara Walters or Dan Rather when they're making $2 million a year and they're talking about some starving family somewhere or somebody poor. They have no credibility to me because I see them as stars. I see them as part of this whole entertainment business, which television is. Riding around in limousines and never going to a supermarket and having their kids in private schools. And in New York, if you try to get into CBS or NBC, you can't. There are guards.
Oh, yes.
In fact, they have an electric gate, and yet they purport to relate to people and say, well, we are going to communicate with you, but there's no interaction. You couldn't get through to tell those people how you feel about something. Or am I crazy, Joel?
No, I know what you're talking about, and it's kind of a bizarre thing. The thing is, there are only a few of those people, and what is done is sort of like what's done with sports and all the kids playing basketball on playgrounds. Everyone thinks they're going to become that $2 million contract person, and therefore they keep reporters in broadcasting as well as reporters in the field I'm in at a fairly low-paid level, working harder than the millionaires to churn out stuff to eventually get that break where you're at that level.
Well, that's because we don't appreciate the written word or writers or intellectuals in this country.
I don't know if it's, the whole thing about how people are paid, what they're paid is a whole other.
But you are in a glamour profession.